Well, so I'll tell you one of the most powerful experiences when my son was in the hospital. He was struggling with a fever of 106, 107 degrees, and the doctors could not figure out what was going on with him. And they were saying that it was due to the fact that he had a traumatic brain injury and his body couldn't regulate temperature. And I walked into his room that particular day, and I was the only one in his room, which never happened. And he was laying in the bed, the machines were doing the breathing for him. And I heard a voice say, "Get the oil." And so I didn't know what that meant. And I had a backpack with me and I set the backpack on a chair and I started looking through the backpack, just trying to figure out like what I don't know what this message means. And I stumbled upon a card that we had gotten from a well-wisher in the community. And in the card was a tiny little envelope with a piece of gauze that had consecrated oil from the Saint Charbel, who was a healer in Lebanon in the 1800s.
Wow.
And being certified as a Reiki practitioner, I made the decision that I was going to use the oil while doing Reiki. And so I walked over to my son's body and I placed the oil across his temples, near his tracheotomy that was doing the breathing for him. And as I moved to his chest, I had what I felt was like an electric current run through my body. And I
Mm.
immediately knew what was wrong with him. And I knew the doctors needed to attend to him medically. And I knew the medicine that he needed. And
Wow.
I didn't think about it. I just ran out into the hallway. His nurse was out there and I said, "Nora, my son has a massive infection in his chest. He needs an IV antibiotic that starts with a C that he needs for 3 days."
That's
And
insane.
she looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, "Just get the doctor." And within a few minutes, the doctors were surrounding his bed. And sure enough, one of his lungs was almost completely filled with fluid. The other one was completely filled with fluid. He had a massive infection in his chest. And me diagnosing from my intuitive ability saved his life.
Wow. Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Through the Magical Door. I'm your host, Samaya. I work as psychic soul alignment coach, and today's guest I would like to introduce you to. Her name is Stacey Brown. Stacey, it's lovely to have you. Welcome to my podcast. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So Stacey has had empathic intuitive abilities her entire life. After a family trauma, she left her successful career as a hairdresser to dedicate her life to helping people on their healing journey. And now she does that. The way she serves other people is by intuitive readings, spiritual mentorship, coaching, and her successful podcast, Spiritual Journey Path to Awakening. She's written a book called Journey to Soul Center, Discovering the Gift of Surrender. So Stacey, it's really lovely to have you here. Thank you for being in the space with me today.
Thanks for having me.
I guess if you were to share something about your life, something about anything from the very beginning of your life to now, that would really kind of give us a sense of how come you've ended up doing the sort of work you do
Mhm.
and serve people in the way that you do now. So if you were to kind of like describe that to us, what would you say would be helpful for us to know about you that will make sense as to why you do what you do now?
So I struggled for a long time with religion and spirituality. I was raised in a devoutly Mormon home, so the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it didn't leave a lot of room for exploration and self-discovery when it came to spirituality and how to practice it. So
Hmm.
I knew that I had intuitive abilities, but I kept them shrouded in secrecy for most of my life.
Right.
And when I would work with people behind the chair as a hairdresser, I would put my hands on them and I would sense things that were going on with them and I would guide the conversation in that direction. But I never felt like it was something I could be open about.
Mm,
And 5 years ago, my whole life shifted. I had a very successful career, beautiful home in the country, a happy marriage, 4 kids, and my 17-year-old son just plummeted into issues with mental health and substance abuse.
mm,
And it happened quickly and it happened very extremely. And in January of 2019, he overdosed in our home and survived. And then 4 months later, he attempted to take his own life by running his car into a tree at 100 miles an hour. And when that happened, it opened me up to some spiritual encounters, specifically in the hospital, that I could no longer ignore the messages that I was getting. And I felt drawn to using those gifts and abilities in a bigger way to help people. So as my son was recovering, I was learning more about myself and about how I was meant to show up in the world and how I was meant to help people. And it really was a path that I felt was laid out for me. I didn't even feel like I really made a decision. I feel like the circumstances governed what was happening to me
for pushing towards it. Yeah.
and pushing me towards something totally different.
I always, first of all, I want to ask you a question, but I always find it very interesting how crisis, and what we call spiritual emergency in a way can often be that catalyst for men and women to like really, it turns on the gifts, right? Like things activate or that sense of purpose or whatever. Isn't it interesting? Like as human beings, it's almost like our software seems to be plugged into crisis and emergency to want to like create that shift or have that awakening. First of all, obviously, that's what I think to go through as a parent. That's a huge experience. I can't imagine what that's like. But I would also love to know, and obviously your son is doing well, so I'm really pleased to know that and to know that he's doing well. And that must have been quite a process with all that you've all been through as a family.
Yes.
Curious to also know what some of the messages you were receiving in the hospital, what those were about, where they were coming from, and what they were saying to you.
Well, so I'll tell you one of the most powerful experiences when my son was in the hospital. He was struggling with a fever of 106, 107 degrees, and the doctors could not figure out what was going on with him. And they were saying that it was due to the fact that he had a traumatic brain injury and his body couldn't regulate temperature. And I walked into his room that particular day, and I was the only one in his room, which never happened. And he was laying in the bed, the machines were doing the breathing for him. And I heard a voice say, "Get the oil." And so I didn't know what that meant. And I had a backpack with me and I set the backpack on a chair and I started looking through the backpack, just trying to figure out like what I don't know what this message means. And I stumbled upon a card that we had gotten from a well-wisher in the community. And in the card was a tiny little envelope with a piece of gauze that had consecrated oil from the Saint Charbel, who was a healer in Lebanon in the 1800s.
Wow.
And being certified as a Reiki practitioner, I made the decision that I was going to use the oil while doing Reiki. And so I walked over to my son's body and I placed the oil across his temples, near his tracheotomy that was doing the breathing for him. And as I moved to his chest, I had what I felt was like an electric current run through my body. And I
Mm.
immediately knew what was wrong with him. And I knew the doctors needed to attend to him medically. And I knew the medicine that he needed. And
Wow.
I didn't think about it. I just ran out into the hallway. His nurse was out there and I said, "Nora, my son has a massive infection in his chest. He needs an IV antibiotic that starts with a C that he needs for 3 days."
That's
And
insane.
she looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, just get the doctor. And within a few minutes, the doctors were surrounding his bed. And sure enough, one of his lungs was almost completely filled with fluid. The other one was completely filled with fluid. He had a massive infection in his chest. And me diagnosing from my intuitive ability saved his life.
Wow. That's
Hmm.
powerful, eh? What was the reaction when the doctors realized that you had essentially diagnosed with absolutely zero sort of medical scientific way? What was the response? And how great that they came straight away and they responded as well, which is
Yeah, I mean, it was great that they responded. I mean, the one doctor came up to me a couple days later and he said, "You know, you're crazy, right?" And I just kind of laughed because I mean, yeah, I felt crazy. Um, but he was like, "You know, you're crazy saved your son." And that was kind of the conclusion that we came to after that whole experience was because I had listened to my intuition, I had gotten the doctors to check something that they hadn't checked with my son, and sure enough, it saved him. And
wow.
that was kind of the point when I made the decision, I can't let these inspirations or these feelings go, that I've got to honor them because this is how I'm truly going to be able to help people.
I I hear you. And also how interesting that even if jokingly and playfully, he called you crazy. And again, coming back to the fact that you mentioned, being a Merman culture, I'm working with somebody right now who's in a sort of Merman background. He spoke about similar things, um, how easy it is to name someone crazy, right? Who does things unexplainably, who has that level of intuition. And of course it's not sort of shared in a sort of with a bad intention, but it's kind of like how easy to categorize what we don't understand as crazy. uh,
Mhm.
but clearly that must have been a deeply impactful experience to want to push you to share in the way you are. It was through illness in 2015, my shamanic illness, and having an experience with what I call the goddess. Um, that was what turned my life around and got me to really give up the job I was at. At the time, I was working in domestic violence and move into just being of service through my spiritual gifts. So
Mhm.
it's very interesting. We share a little bit of a crisis kind of time that was that turnaround.
It changed
Um,
us.
yeah. So tell me a little bit about, I basically I help people with the spiritual gifts and I open up particularly the psychic gifts. And I'm really curious about, because my audience is very keen on knowing this sort of thing. Um, you had this experience, you helped your son, he's on the road to recovery since that incident, obviously leaving the hospital, da, da, da. What happens next for you? You had the realization, I can't leave this, I need to do something with this. But
Mhm.
tell me, because that can be a very messy path for so many. And
Yeah.
I love kind of outing it for people. I love being able to go there to those messy bits because it doesn't tend to be a straight line like, oh, yeah, then I went and did my spiritual work and everything was okay.
Yeah, no.
So I'd love to know a little bit more about that. What was it like for you? Obviously, your son starts to get better. There's a road to recovery, there's a whole process around that. What happens with you then once that situation with the hospital is like, you go through that, then what?
Well, it was personally a very challenging season for me. I ended up requiring a surgery that was botched, and I spent 3 months in bed. Then we had COVID hit, and that changed everything for everyone. And I saw my marriage ending. I could see that my husband at the time was pulling away, and I was leaning into healing and doing everything I could to bounce back from this. And I saw him kind of becoming introverted and closed off and not dealing with things in the same way that I was. I was introduced to a social media app called Clubhouse, and Clubhouse gave me a platform where I started using my voice and talking about the experiences that I had had with my son. And it was the first time outside of therapy that I was talking about what had happened.
Beautiful.
Felt like such a relief.
Yeah.
It was such a release to talk about these things and these experiences and not hide them in secrecy. And I met a gentleman who has since become a business partner who lives in the UK. And he one day in Clubhouse asked me what I wanted to manifest. And I said a trip to the UK. And within 6 weeks, I was on a plane to the UK to meet people that I had never met in person before, but had just talked to on a
Wow.
social media app. And from that space, I was inspired to write my book. And I wrote my book in his home on one of my visits to see him.
Wow. What's the book about?
The book is about my son's journey. It's about me and like my journey through Mormonism and then my spiritual awakening through my son's crisis
Yeah.
and how I broke into my intuitive abilities because of what happened with my son.
Mm. And just thinking about soul contracts at the moment as you're discussing this, right? Like souls coming together on a contract, assisting each other, right? You assisted your son in his recovery, obviously, his soul choosing that for himself, whilst on the same time, he's assisting you through his crisis to open up to your gifts. And something about that, the poetry of that through the human suffering, obviously, that is part of that experience as well. Um, I love that. So, and you've mentioned the UK, you've mentioned that connection with this random person who came up and started to open up this conversation with you. You find
Yeah.
yourself in the UK, you have these experiences, you meet all these lovely people, write this book. And just as we connected today, before we started recording, you mentioned that you're moving to the UK. So we're gonna probably go back again, but I'd love to know. So we from there, when did that happen again? Was it just after the pandemic or during the pandemic?
It was after the pandemic.
Right. In 2000,
I
was it the first round or the second? Because we had a couple of, was it 2021 or
Yeah, in 2021, I started working as a mentor and coach, helping people on their spiritual journey, helping them with their awakening, helping them transition, whether it's, out of a toxic relationship or a toxic
yeah.
job experience. Started working with people like that. And one of my clients found us through the podcast and worked with us, myself and my business partner, for about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed in touch after we worked together. And the short version is we fell in love. And we are now engaged. We got engaged on Father's Day.
Wow.
And yeah, and
I
we
love
are
that.
getting married in the spring. Yes.
And he's British, right? So you
Yes.
moved to be with him in the UK. Wow, what a story, eh?
Yeah, crazy story. And he has a crazy story too.
Does he?
So the journey of us being together is a really powerful story.
And maybe that's another book to be written from the sounds of it, or somehow the story to be told when the time feels right for that. Um,
Yes.
I love that. I love that. I kind of want to ask you a little bit about, um, you know, you've talked about one of the things you'd really love to raise awareness is around removing the stigma of mental health and
Hmm.
substance abuse, right? Alongside, obviously, how powerful spiritual practice will be. But I want to hear from you about the mental health stigma at the moment. In 2024, I used to work in mental health. That's really been a big part of understanding about humans and obviously understanding also that it's a spectrum, right? Like we're all
Yeah.
experiencing kind of difficulties with mental health. It's not a black and white thing, but as somebody who's worked in mental health and acute psychiatric services years ago, I'm curious to know from you, from your experience at this time, at this current time, how big do you find the stigma to still be? How much of that is also connected to, say, Mormon culture and you know, where you live and your experience of in that particular setting. But I'd love to know where you feel we're at the moment with stigma around mental health.
I still feel like we're in a bit of a crisis
Mhm.
because when everything happened with my son, it was, you know, looked at as an accident that he, had accidentally crashed his car.
Seriously?
Yeah. And saying that he did it intentionally changed the game for so many people in our community. It just it became this very stigmatized situation. And then the question was he using drugs when he did it? Which he wasn't. He was sober the day that he attempted. And I just found that a lot of the issues that he was facing, there was a lot of scrutiny and judgment that came along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that left me in a space of feeling guilt and shame as his mother, that I couldn't save him, that I couldn't help him, that I couldn't change things for him, that he was at a certain point so desperate to leave this world that he would make a decision like that on an impulse. And I found that people were very judgmental of what was happening with him. And
Mm.
through that, made me realize I had to use my voice, because if I didn't use my voice, it was almost like I was saying it was okay that it was being handled the way that it was.
Yeah.
And so I chose to be open about it in my book and say, this is the journey, this is what happened, and this is how I'm going to handle it moving forward. And it was very liberating. It was very, very liberating to say, I am not going to stay in this space of allowing people to keep me quiet because my son did something around his mental health. That
And
he
yeah,
It
sorry.
was something I had to do. It
Of
was like I had to
course.
use my voice, and the place that it felt the right way to do it was through the book, because the book was telling the whole story. The book wasn't just about my son, it was about my own struggles, right? And recognizing that my struggles might be different than my son's, but they had definitely been passed down. I had struggled with my own mental health. I had struggled with my own journey. And now here my son was struggling in a very public way. And I wanted to be clear on what had happened from start to finish. I didn't want there to be any question about what he had done or why he had done it. I wanted to blow the top off of the secrecy.
Yeah, and that's how you start. I mean, this is how generational karma keeps on being passed on, the secrecy and the people's inability and lack of capacity to really go there, to really break it down, to really also look at ourselves
Yes.
is really toxic, you know, and it's not possible for the healing to be done, you know, in the right way, you know, to go deep within it if that stuff is not being talked about. Um, and like you said, you know, not only for your son, you talked about your journey. Imagine also, obviously, that's been extremely helpful for your son. I can imagine
Mhm.
doing that and, you know, kind of validating him in that way. But also all these people who are having these experiences and feeling alone and maybe not knowing which way to take. Like you knew that you were going to stand up and talk about it and support him through that and also talk about your journey. But there's a lot of people out there who really just don't know how to do that. I
It's
really feel
true.
the energy of the book being very powerful, and I felt the energy of your story without knowing as much about it. I can feel that almost like the aura that it's leaving for people. Like I really see the imprint in the etheric that it's leaving for people to like to awaken and educate people and to really help a lot of people. And as you're sharing this, I'm just going with the stuff I'm getting from everything you share. It feels like it's quite a very big, impactful sort of energy, that the story and everything that's going on and how you feel your mission to be paving. Tell me a little bit about how do you feel at this moment? There's been a few years that's passed since then. You've kind of put that book out there. There's been a big process for you. There's been a big process for your son, I imagine, through this. I know you told me that he's doing well, right? He's on his path of recovery. What does he do now? What is he doing with himself at the moment?
He works in the addictions community, so he helps people who are struggling with the same demons that he struggled with.
So amazing.
Mhm. It
So,
is.
so amazing. This is like the model of service user involvement work, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what we call it in the UK. I don't know, in the US, I worked with domestic violence victims who sort of received the support, did the healing, go into a place of safety. They became the support system for other people. And there's nothing more powerful, and I did that in mental health. There's nothing more powerful than a person who's experienced those demons and had those experiences to really be able to help other people, and how therapeutic for them as well.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
How beautiful that he's doing that and that he's doing well. That's really wonderful.
He's doing really well. It's been a real blessing.
So I love to know, there's this thread around the intuitive, the spiritual coaching and all that comes with that. And then there's the thread around mental health, education and awakening around that, and educating families and people around that, and undoing the stigma. Tell me a little bit with those two areas, where are you at in terms of how you want to take that in the future, and where do you feel? I'm really curious at this particular thing, the junction of these things that intersect people's life experiences and where they want to go with this. I'm really curious. Um, where do you feel you want to go with this now as you're in this part of the journey? Do you feel you're now going to focus more on some of the spiritual stuff as you move into the UK? Do you find yourself wanting to do more education around mental health, or where are you at right now? I mean, obviously you're just about to make a massive move, so it might not be quite the most prominent thing right now, but do you have a
Yeah.
sense of what's unfolding for you at the moment with all that?
I think that I absolutely want to continue helping people on a spiritual level. I feel like there's nothing more rewarding than
Yeah,
seeing somebody go through an awakening and being able to assist them and support them in that process.
I agree
I think
100%.
so many people are going through massive transition in their lives right now, whether it be, like I said, a career shift, a marital shift, a shift from religion to spirituality, some sort of an awakening. People are going through a process where they're trying to figure out what next steps to take.
Yeah,
And I absolutely am passionate about helping people on that journey. I love the process. I love developing a rapport with my clients.
mm,
My initial program is 3 months. I love weekly meeting with those clients and spending time with them and getting to know them. I love seeing them continue on with me with maintenance after the program's done. And being a support in that way really lights my fire. So I
beautiful.
absolutely see that as being a big part of what I do.
Yeah,
As far as advocacy work with the mental health and substance abuse,
yeah,
um, I do that through my book. I do that
yeah,
through podcasts. I do that through other ways, trying to reach as many people as I can with the story
yeah.
and sharing my journey. But I feel like as far as work and career goes, I'm absolutely leaning more towards the spiritual aspect of things.
Beautiful. And also, like you said, I think the book has created that legacy already. And your son, your son has now stepped into that role more fully too. And I think that's really beautiful, that he's doing that. So in a way that you can really now focus more on the areas that involve your spiritual gifts, which is really great. Um, I want to go a little bit, I'm just being guided to ask you a little bit about the healing process, and particularly around people's motivations when we do have, I guess, okay, here's what I want to ask you. When people, if you have to share something around this, that you get a gut feeling around this or something, because you've been through this experience, the divorce and everything else, would you say that for people going through extreme, deep change, which is going to happen to most of us at some point or other, right? And me being an alignment coach, I'm really curious to know a little bit around, say, before that big shift happens in someone's life, or let's say before that big crisis happens, would you say there are some either warning signs or moments where things could be getting revealed to us and maybe we're not paying attention? And I'm just always curious a little bit about that process, that or that time before the big
Oh yeah.
crisis,
Oh yeah.
because I think there's something very interesting and kind of something about it that feels quite full and something that we don't always pay attention to.
100%.
So, yeah,
Mm.
and I'd love to know from your personal experience, what do you feel, what were the warning signs for that shift or that change before the crisis hit?
Mhm.
Was it something that was trying to get your attention?
Yes, 100%.
Tell me more about that time and tell me more about that process for you, how open you were to it, if so.
Mhm.
And if not, what were the kind of like the blocks to it? Because I think that people can learn a lot about that process, right?
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
might be that we need the lesson, we need to go through the experience, but in some cases, it might be that we don't.
Yeah.
Ending, right? So I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear from you about that.
Yeah. I mean, it was a very challenging time because I was feeling very spiritually aligned. And I felt like I was on this deep journey of self discovery. Both my husband and I, we were exploring religion, we were exploring different disciplines, we were
Wow.
we were fasting, we were praying, we were in this space of a lot of introspection, a lot of personal healing was happening during that time. And when I look back on it now, I absolutely believe that the universe, my higher power, my angels, my guides were preparing me, getting me ready to go into the ring. Like it was like I was going through some sort of personal training to
Yeah.
prepare me to be in the boxing ring fighting for the fight of my life. And I couldn't see it at the time, but I absolutely saw it very shortly after. I was like, wow, we've been going through all of this stuff to prepare us. Like there were signs all along the way that something was coming our way that we couldn't see, that we didn't know what it was going to look like. And we were being prepared for that. I
Mm.
think the unfortunate thing is that everybody takes that preparation differently. And my partner and I didn't necessarily take it in the same way.
Can you say more about that? Because I mean, it's understandable that people will process. We all have, no matter if in a partnership or not, we're going to have a very unique experience with whatever awakening is going on. But what makes it that, I guess, for some people, it's meant to, they understand that through the difference of how they process it, there's still a sense of like, but we still choose to be together as to those
Mhm.
who don't. I'm curious a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, my ex-husband is also in recovery, and I believe that for him, our son's demons reignited something insecure in him that hadn't healed yet.
Okay.
And he didn't know how to process that. And I didn't have a history of addiction. And so the
Mm,
way that I processed it was very, very different than the way my ex-husband processed it.
right.
And it ultimately divided us. It was like I was going this direction, trying to be vocal and talk through things to heal and write a book and better myself. And he was going this direction and kind of shutting down and closing off and not able to communicate about the situation, almost as if he wanted it to just go away and it never exist. And
Mm,
for me, it was
yeah.
like it was so pivotal in my journey that I couldn't ignore that it had happened. And talking about it was
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah. But it sounds also from what you're sharing that it was more than just how it got processed, that in a way what you wanted to do with it following the process was very different.
Very different.
And I guess if the trigger ends up becoming bigger than the actual issue itself, which was at
Mhm.
the time was the focus was around your son, I guess, right? I can imagine how that could have taken you in different directions,
Mhm.
potentially. That must have been quite tough. Um,
It was very hard. It was very,
yeah,
very hard. I did not expect that I was going to give up so much of my own personal comfort through my son's pain. But I absolutely went on a journey of giving up my marriage, giving up my home, um, changing my whole life. I mean, my life right now looks absolutely nothing like it did
yeah.
3 years ago, 5 years ago. I mean, it's changed so much. And some of that change has been beautiful and amazing and powerful. And some of that change has been scary and painful and
I mean,
stressful.
it's still loss. Loss
Mhm.
is loss. We're humans, and
Yes.
processing loss is not easy,
No.
especially with loved ones, So of course it's going to be,
Hmm.
you're going to have a human experience from with all that. Uh,
Yes.
yes, so I hear you. And in a way, it sounds that almost like the initiation that took place, because it feels like a process of initiation. Um, it was just going to be life changing, and it's kind of like it literally took you in different directions, the two of you, and that it tested your relationship in a massive way. Um, so for those who say now seeing it from the point of view, we talked about the before the crisis, right?
Hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about that initial time after everything changes. You go through the changes, the separation, divorce, for some people could be illness, loss of job, da da da, and people find themselves in the ashes of what once was their life, right?
Hmm.
For those who are struggling to reinvent themselves as part of the process, do you have something to share about the process of reinvention, about the timing of reinvention, about the messiness of releasing the old life and embracing the new, especially when the new elements are not fully clear to us, right? Like we having this conversation at a time where obviously you met your new partner, your son is now doing well. If we've been having this conversation a couple of years ago, I'm guessing we would have been looking at different things as well, possibly, right?
Hmm.
For those who say are kind of before where you are right now, where things are a lot more clearer, the new path feels a lot more, clear, but also you are a lot more settled. And I'm assuming, because that might not be the case. I mean, you're obviously moving home, so you can't be too settled, but you know what I mean internally, right?
Yeah.
For those people who are really on that brink of that, they've kind of maybe out of the crisis, but they're still kind of sitting in what's the expression, when you're sitting in the ashes of, yeah, your old life.
Hmm.
What do you have to share as support or tips to help that process of reinvention and healing?
Hmm.
And like I said, when the new is not fully clear to people or fully presented to them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's ever fully presented right away. I don't think, I mean, I don't know of anybody who's had it all kind of laid out for them after a crisis that, okay, this is what you do. You go from A to B and B to C and C to D. Like, I don't know many people who bounce back from a crisis like that. For me, it was a lot of grieving and a
Mm.
lot of healing. And a lot of that came through the process of journaling and writing. I feel like there
Mm.
is so much power in the written word and the
Yeah.
ability for it to give us a space to process things that we might not otherwise know how to process. And so, yes, my book was a huge therapeutic part of it, but my independent writing, my journaling was also a space for me to contemplate what had gone on, and give me a space to process it and to grieve. I think talking about it is also really powerful. I think there's so much to be gained from good conversation where you feel listened to and heard and seen. And so I would say it was a combination of things that I did to work through that time. And some of it feels like it was just survival, right? Because we're going through so much and this is all new. But I still feel like the same habits that I leaned into in the beginning are the same habits that I lean into now. And that's spending time in nature, that's spending quiet time by myself in meditation, and that's writing. Those are my powerful tools that have helped me navigate through so much.
I love that. And I love that you talked about, you used the word survival. And actually, it's very interesting how in moments of crisis, the survival instinct somehow will kick in, right?
Mhm,
Because what else can we do,
mhm,
especially when we feel threatened by mental health stuff and by, depression or whatever else can kick in and seeing
mhm.
our lives falling apart. Um, I love that writing was the tool for you.
Oh,
Um, and actually how I love journaling. I think it's been really supportive for me in very difficult times. And just maybe that for others, something else might pop up for them that might end up being stronger as a tool, right? Like, I
mhm,
don't know, for somebody it could be movement, it could be dance, it could be getting into like some practice, like yoga practice, moving the body or whatever, or taking on some art. I know a woman that I know that I lived in a Buddhist community with years ago. She came out of a very long relationship, moved to Poland to be with her partner, moved back in England, it didn't work out. And she's she used to be a dancer years ago. She ended up turning her into pottery as a thing, and she's becoming most accomplished, incredible potter. Like, she creates some amazing pottery, and
mhm.
she absolutely loves it. She found her real passion in life, and became her vocation. So it can be so many things for people, and maybe might be worth to leave as a note to people, like to really start to pay attention what you start seeking out at those moments of when there's desolation, where things have fallen apart, when there's such deep change, the kind of thing you end up looking towards or looking for. You don't know what seed you're going to plant with that. It can end up
So
like not only saving your life, it could end up becoming something that you become really passionate about.
yes.
Um, I love that. Um, so when is your plan for so literally you're preparing for the move now? When is the actual travel? Is that
So I'm gonna do it in stages. So
uh-huh.
I am packing up my condo now, and I'm planning on going to the UK from January until April to spend some time with my fiance as we're waiting to apply for a visa. And then I'll fly back to the States in April and we will get married and apply for a spouse visa. And then hopefully I'll be in the UK permanently by summer.
Wow, that's
Hmm.
incredible. So you've got a
Yeah.
couple of months to kind of wrap things up and just kind of do your thing and just really prepare for the big move.
Yes. And during that time, while you're making all these changes and all these amazing things are happening, the beautiful thing is I've decided to document the journey. And so I'm sharing it on social media and hopefully inspiring other people on their healing journey
Mm-hmm.
to do things out of their comfort zone. So my hope is while I'm figuring it out, because I don't have it all figured out yet, but while I'm figuring it
It
out,
does.
I can lead by example and show other people that there is more to this life than what you expect or what you think. And I really want to show people the ins and outs of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, the hard days. I'm going to show it all.
I love that. I'll share obviously your social media handles in the description of this video. People can connect with you and see your journey through there. And also, as we bringing this to a close slowly, I just wanted to say, you mentioning that because I haven't got it all figured out. But actually, isn't that the point? First of all, who has got it all worked out, right? I don't think that necessarily that is a thing,
Mm-hmm.
but isn't the working it out part of the process of just showing up? And in a way that you documenting this makes a lot of sense, in that you're actually documenting a process of working it out as you go along, because isn't that what we're all doing anyway?
Mm-hmm.
And then of course the courage and the resources you have to reach in within yourself to connect with as you're going through such a massive transition, because that is a massive transition.
Massive.
What do you think of Yorkshire?
I love it so much. It's like living in a dream. The first time I ever went there, I got out of the car and I heard the words, "You're home." And I was
Oh,
like, that's
beautiful.
kind of weird. Um, but my fiance owns a glamping and camping campground that gives people like a luxurious experience on
Amazing.
110 acres. And it's a really magical place. It's just got an energy unlike anything I've ever felt before.
That sounds really great.
It
Like
is.
really lovely. It sounds like a really fun adventure, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. And that maybe, yeah, everything that you went through prepared you and set the stage for this beautiful next stage adventure you're now to experience. And that maybe that can be one of joy and expansion and growth and service through your gifts and
Mm-hmm. I'm
fulfillment.
excited. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm nervous. You know,
Yeah, of
I have four kids
course.
and I have four kids and my kids live in the States. And so, I'm making the decision to move abroad and live further away from them. But I'm committed to traveling back and forth so that I can be involved with my kids. I also have a granddaughter. So I'm making the commitment that I'm going to make it work. I'm going to be with the person that I love and
Yeah.
I'm going to travel back and forth and be a part of my kids' lives as well.
And your children sound old enough now. They have their own lives, they've got their own thing going on, and they're well.
Hmm.
So what an exciting time to be exploring all this. So I love this.
Thank
I
you.
really, really love this. So I just wanted to wish you well with all this, because it sounds like you've been through on such a journey, and I know we've only touched on some of it. I know that there's so much to a person's life than what gets shared in like 50 minutes.
Yes.
Want to say a big thank you for sharing your story with me and with everyone. It's a really powerful story. It's definitely kind of showcasing your kind of authenticity, and you kind of taking the call and rising to the call that the situation of your son brought to the light, and
Yes.
everything that evoked, and the transformation in your life and how you stepped up with it all. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
And I really look forward to yeah, maybe kind of hearing some of the fun parts of that next part of your journey as well,
Me
as you
too.
step into this new adventure and this new journey. So thank
I'm
you for
really
sharing it with us.
Thank you for having me. This has been a beautiful
No,
experience.
it's been really a pleasure. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it all pans out. I live in south east of Sussex, well,
Hmm.
southeast of England, which is in East Sussex. So it's a little bit further away from Yorkshire. I was saying to my son actually the other day, like, Yorkshire would be an interesting place to once visit. It's quite a bit far for us actually, but it's funny that now having a conversation to a US woman who's moving to Yorkshire. But you don't know how paths cross. We
That's right.
certainly seem to be connected with this sort of intuitive community, which is great.
Yes.
And I really wish you all the best. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you everybody for watching. You can follow Stacey's life and her journey in the social media below. You can also share about your work there. So if anybody
Yeah.
wants to find out more about how you can support them, how they can be supported by you, they can check that out as well down there. And your book also, we have the link. So I think that's an important one for people who might be going through that journey, either through their own kids, their other family members or friends, and they might feel more validated by reading somebody else's story around this. So we'll share that link as well. Thank you for watching. Feel free to follow the channel if you want to see more interviews like this and sharing tips around specifically opening up to our spiritual gifts. It's been a pleasure, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.